"You don't belong on that bench, you uppity," Detective Marcus Johnson barked. And the words cut the hush of Courtroom 8B like a knife. Before anyone could react, his fist smashed into Judge Sarah Washington's face, and the courtroom exploded into chaos. As the 52-year-old judge pitched backward, Johnson's boot driving into her ribs with a sickening crack that rang off the marble. What Johnson didn't know was that Sarah Washington was not some random jurist. She was Devin Brown's sister, the teenager Johnson had executed 3 years earlier and buried under falsified reports. And this trial was not ordinary at all, but a trap laid across 15 years of grief and careful patience, with FBI agents waiting in the gallery for the moment Johnson's arrogance destroyed him. Blood trickled from Washington's lip as she rose, her dark eyes bright with a terrible, steady triumph, and she spoke calmly. "Detective Johnson, you just assaulted a federal judge in front of 12 FBI agents and confessed to murdering my brother." Color drained from his face. Swagger crumbled into panic. "Devin Brown," she said, 16 years old. "You shot him in the back and called it self-defense. Now you will answer for every lie you told." A wave of gasps rolled through the room as the truth snapped into focus. This wasn't about Riley Williams's minor charge. It was about systemic murder, cover-ups, and one woman's patient mission for justice, disguised as routine proceedings. Agent Maria Torres rose, badge catching light, and read the charges. "Detective Marcus Johnson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, human trafficking, and assault on a federal judicial officer." Johnson's hand twitched toward his gun. Torres warned, "Don't." 17 agents are in this building," she said, "and your entire unit is already in custody. The precinct is being raided right now." The weight of it hit him hard. Judge Washington opened a manila folder and laid out the thing that would end his career and his freedom. Audio, documents, testimony, footage. Everything he thought he'd buried. "It's fabricated," Johnson spat. "No," she answered. "We can prove you and your partners ran a trafficking ring, targeting teens to sell to private correctional facilities." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Torres said, "We've been monitoring you for 8 months. Every call, every deal." Johnson stammered that such surveillance would have tipped him off. Washington's smile went cold. "You're right. We've been watching for 3 years, since you murdered my brother. The last 8 months were the final phase. She held up a federal wiretap order. She produced a badge sealed in plastic, Detective Kevin Pierce's badge, and named him, your partner, who sold children to private facilities, while you removed those who resisted." "Pierce died in a car accident," Johnson muttered. "Washington said no. He was murdered by your other partner after agreeing to cooperate with us. He gave us everything: names, bank accounts, video of you executing teens, the financial links to private prison contractors." Torres added that this was a joint FBI, DEA, and U.S. Marshal investigation. Johnson looked for an exit. They were all blocked. Washington went on. "You thought you were untouchable because of local protection, but every contact, every bribe, every kill has been traced." Torres pressed a button, and the courtroom screens flickered alive with video of Johnson meeting Raymond Costanos of Riverside Youth Corrections, Johnson counting cash and saying the Brown kid asked too many questions and had to be eliminated. Hearing his own voice on the recording bled away the last of his defiance. "This can't be happening," he whispered. Washington's voice hardened. "You set yourself up. Every crime was your choice. Now you'll face the justice you thought you controlled." Agents wheeled in carts stacked with evidence boxes while Torres announced financial records showing over $400,000 in bribes from correctional facilities and bail companies. Washington's lip trembled, but she stayed steady. "Detective Johnson, you're facing charges including human trafficking of minors, murder, furtherance of a criminal enterprise, and conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law." The room thickened with tension as Torres gestured to her team, and Washington fixed him with a look that cut deeper than any wound. Let's discuss your collaboration with Captain Robert Davis and your so-called training program for targeting minority youth. Johnson spluttered. Davis was following policy. We were cleaning up the streets. Washington activated another recording. Johnson's voice filled the room, cold and brutal. The key to policing minority neighborhoods is dominance. They must learn that questioning authority has consequences, sometimes permanent ones. Silence slammed down. Johnson sank to his knees, the truth dawning too late. For years he had operated above the law, certain no one could touch him. Now he was surrounded by the very system he had corrupted, undone by his own violence and pride. Washington felt the ache in her ribs and the sting of blood on her tongue, but beneath the pain burned a fierce satisfaction. Her brother's quiet promise from the funeral echoed in her mind. I'll make them pay. And now, as agents read Johnson his rights, that promise was finally being kept. But outside Courtroom 8B, the city still swarmed with officers who believed badges made them gods, and as Washington watched Johnson led away, she knew this was only the beginning. Justice had arrived, but the war for truth had just begun. She let the recording play for several more devastating minutes. That training session had been attended by 47 officers from 3 precincts, and 17 of those officers were being arrested as they spoke. Johnson begged that everything was taken out of context. Officers must be prepared, he pleaded. But Torres asked what context would make it acceptable to train officers to murder children to protect trafficking operations. She opened a laptop and displayed bank statements and contracts showing payments totaling over $400,000 from private prison companies, and explained that each arrest he made in minority communities generated an average payment per arrest. Washington said Devin Brown's murder wasn't only about hate, it was about silencing a witness who could have exposed their trafficking. The federal government seized Johnson's assets under civil forfeiture. Then, with surgical timing, the courtroom door opened and Reverend Thomas Wilson walked in, and Johnson's remaining color drained completely. Reverend Wilson was the primary undercover informant, Washington said. He'd worked with federal authorities for over a year, documenting Johnson's activity and recording conversations. Reverend Wilson stepped to the stand and, with the calm of someone who'd watched too much pain, told the room that every time Johnson talked about problem children, he recorded it with federal-grade equipment. A recording played, Johnson's voice cruel and casual. That Williams girl needs to be dealt with before she starts causing trouble like her cousin did last year. Reverend Wilson had worn surveillance equipment to 37 meetings with Johnson over the past year. Each conversation became another piece of a devastating puzzle. This is impossible, Johnson whispered. We recorded everything, Wilson said, including Johnson's confession about murdering Devin Brown, because Devin had seen children being loaded into an unmarked van bound for private correctional facilities. Torres announced that, based on Wilson's recordings, they had identified 43 children trafficked through Johnson's operation over the past 4 years, and that 17 of those children were still missing. Washington read the final crushing words. This recording alone provided probable cause for federal charges of conspiracy to commit murder, human trafficking of minors, and violations of civil rights under color of law, each charge carrying the possibility of the harshest penalties. Johnson shattered, screaming that the evidence was fabricated. Torres stepped forward and repeated the arrest, calm and inexorable, as the handcuffs clicked around Marcus Johnson's wrists. Judge Washington spoke softly, but with iron. My brother Devin was 16 when you executed him. You destroyed his life to protect your criminal operation. Johnson turned on her with desperate fury. This isn't over. There are others. The network is bigger than you know. Torres nodded to her team and to Magistrate Holloway. Federal teams stood ready to execute additional warrants. Johnson's confessions had already provided probable cause for searches and arrests across 3 states. Washington watched as the investigation widened, knowing the downfall of one corrupt officer was only the first move in dismantling a vast criminal enterprise. And as Johnson was led away, the courtroom breathed out, stunned, because justice had come. But the fight to find every missing child and to tear out the rotten roots that allowed this to happen had only just begun.